Why was everyone so afraid of the Admiral that morning? It wasn't just rank. It was the way his presence seemed to choke the air out of a room, the way conversations died when his boots clicked across the floor. Commander Nivea Winters noticed it before she even reached the main building. The flags over Naval Station Norfolk snapped sharply in the autumn wind, the smell of salt water heavy in the air. But beneath the morning routine, the formations, the shouts, the rhythmic cadence of another Monday inspection, there was something else, an unease. She felt it before deployments, before ambushes, before the world changed in seconds. The kind of silent soldiers don't mistake. "Commander, the Admiral on a rampage," Lieutenant Farrow whispered as he matched her brisk pace across the courtyard. "He's been pulling files all weekend. Personnel records, old transfers. It's like he's hunting for something." She didn't slow down, her expression didn't flicker. Word travels fast. "Too fast," Farrow muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "People say he's trying to make an example out of someone." "Let's hope it's not you," Nivea said softly. Her tone was even neither cynical nor concerned, but her mind had already moved on. In 5 years of quiet, she had learned that surviving wasn't about what you said. It was about what you didn't. Inside the logistics wing, her office was a reflection of her. Precise, minimal, disciplined. No photos on the walls. No clutter. Just a framed commendation that no one ever noticed. A small plant on the window ledge that somehow never died, and a view of the carrier yard beyond the harbor. She checked her watch, 6:30, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Good. Predictability brought order. It was the opposite of Kandahar, the opposite of chaos. Nivea moved through her routine. Review the overnight reports, update shipment manifests, finalize the logistics efficiency presentation. The quiet hum of the base filtered through the glass. Every click of her keyboard had purpose. Every movement was measured. Yet beneath it all, something ached, an old wound in her left shoulder that tightened with the cold. She rolled it carefully, wincing as tendons resisted. A reminder, a scar that wasn't supposed to exist in the record of a logistics officer. She tugged her sleeve down before anyone saw. By 7:45, the briefing room buzzed with restrained tension. Department heads assembled early. No one wanted to be the last one in before Admiral Garrick Thorne arrived. The man was new to Norfolk but not to reputation. Ambitious, politically connected, a master of optics. His metals gleamed like his teeth when he smiled, which was rarely. He entered like a storm front. The chatter died instantly. Aides scrambled behind him, laying out binders and tablets as if they were ritual offerings. Thorne took his seat at the head of the table, back rigid, eyes scanning the room with surgical detachment. "Let's not waste time," he said. His voice filled the space like a command, cold and crisp. "Fleet readiness is unacceptable. I want answers, not excuses." He began dissecting each presentation, cutting through years of experience with the arrogance of someone who'd never set foot in a combat zone, but believed authority was enough to substitute for it. Officers stammered, others sat rigid, praying not to be called on. When Nivea's turn came, she rose smoothly, projection tablet in hand. Her voice was low but steady. "Logistics has addressed the supply chain inefficiencies from last quarter. The new tracking system has reduced delivery delays by 23%. Thorne frowned. "That's it, Commander." "The complete report is in your briefing packet, sir. Key metrics are highlighted. I'm available for questions." He leaned forward, a predator scenting indifference. "Then let's be specific. Why are maintenance delays still being reported on the Roosevelt?" She met his eyes. "Parts shortages from Northrop. We established alternate sourcing. The issue should be resolved within 2 weeks." "2 weeks is unacceptable." "4 weeks was the next available option, sir," she replied evenly. "Or we could compromise part specifications. Neither seemed prudent." The words were professional, but the calm beneath them irritated him. It wasn't defiance, it was composure. The kind that comes from experience he didn't have. His voice sharpened. "You always this confident when you're under scrutiny, Commander." "Only when the data supports me." The faintest ripple of amusement crossed Captain Richardson's face at the far end of the table. A veteran of 30 years, he'd seen this dynamic before, an insecure superior testing the wrong subordinate. Thorne smiled thinly. "We'll see how long that confidence lasts." The briefing dragged on another hour, filled with veiled barbs and shifting discomfort. When it finally ended, the Admiral straightened and addressed the room. "One more matter. I'll be conducting personnel reviews immediately following this meeting. All department heads will attend." There was a collective pause. Public personnel reviews were almost unheard of. Everyone knew it. It wasn't about efficiency, it was about dominance. Richardson's gaze met Nivea across the table, offering a silent warning. She acknowledged it with the faintest nod, then gathered her folders, her movements deliberate and unhurried. In the hallway, Richardson caught up with her. "Strange approach to leadership," he murmured. "New command, new methods," she said. He studied her quietly. "We haven't formally met, Captain Oz's Richardson." "Nivea Winters." "I know," he said softly. "You look different from your file photo." Her head turned sharply, but he'd already walked ahead. For a moment, that long-buried instinct, the one that always knew when someone recognized her, stirred again. Inside the wardroom, chairs lined the walls. A projection screen flickered to life at the front. The Admiral's aide connected a secure laptop. The hum of electronics filled the silence. When Thorne entered, he didn't sit. He paced slowly, savoring the unease. "Naval excellence requires accountability," he began. "I've reviewed personnel files for key command positions. Some of you have impressive records. Others," his eyes swept the room, "raise concerns." He started with the department heads one by one, exposing trivial mistakes, twisting statistics into condemnations. It wasn't an evaluation. It was theater. When he said her name, the room fell silent. "Let's discuss Commander Winters." Her file appeared on the screen, a sea of redactions. More black bars than text, dates missing, units omitted, a ghost of a record. Thorne's smirk widened. "Quite the Swiss cheese resume, Commander. Care to explain these holes?" "Security clearance restrictions, sir." "Seems excessive for a logistics officer." She didn't answer. He scrolled. "Transferred from Naval Special Warfare Command in 2020. No unit listed." Richardson's posture stiffened. He'd seen this before, a classified background buried under administrative reassignment. "What happened there?" Thorne pressed, voice dripping mock sympathy. "Was it a failed training attempt, or maybe you just weren't cut out for the job?" A few junior officers shifted, eyes down. The tension became almost physical. Nivea said nothing. She stood perfectly still, her gray eyes fixed ahead, unreadable. Thorne took a step closer. "I asked you a question, Commander. What was your call sign?" The silence lengthened. Then a small movement. She adjusted her sleeve. For a moment the edge of a black insignia showed against her wrist, a curved blade, a scythe. Richardson saw it. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "Admiral," he said, voice calm but firm, "with your permission." Thorne blinked, irritated. "Captain, you have something to add?" "Yes, I believe I can answer your question about Commander Winters' call sign." "Oh, you can." Thorne's tone dripped with disbelief. "I can." Richardson's eyes didn't leave Nivea. "That insignia, it belongs to Task Force Erebus." The room went still. "She's Reaper 1. For a moment there was no sound, then a murmur. Someone whispered, "That's impossible. Reaper 1 is just a story." Senior officers exchanged uneasy glances. Thorne looked from Richardson to Winters, his confidence faltering. "What the hell is a Reaper 1? Richardson spoke quietly. Task Force Erebus conducted the most classified operations in modern naval history. Their missions are redacted even at your clearance level, sir. Commander Winters led the team that extracted the Moscow hostages in 19. The same operative who dismantled the Al-Badri network after her unit was killed. The murmuring grew louder. Veterans who had once dismissed her suddenly sat straighter, realization dawning. Thorne's face flushed. That's absurd. If she were who you say, she wouldn't be shuffling paperwork in logistics. Nivea finally spoke. Her voice was soft, controlled, but it carried across the room. Admiral, with respect, where else would you hide someone who needs to disappear? A beat of stunned silence. Then the aide's phone rang. The sound shattered the air. He answered, listened, then turned pale. Sir, Command Center, on the line. Your access of Commander Winters' file triggered automatic notifications at the Pentagon. Her Tier 1 security clearance has just been reactivated. As if on cue, phones started buzzing around the room. Officers looked at their screens at each other at her. The comms officer whispered urgently, Naval Special Warfare Command is demanding immediate contact. Thorne's complexion drained from red to white. Nivea remained perfectly still. I believe this review is over, Admiral. She turned, walked to the door, and left without waiting for permission. The sound of the door closing behind her was soft but final. And somehow, that quiet click carried more authority than all his shouting ever had. She walked out into the cold. The air on the steps outside the wardroom felt heavier than before, the low clouds pressing against the base like a lid. Somewhere behind her, voices still murmured orders, confusion, disbelief. But she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Commander Nivea Winters had spent years mastering the art of invisibility. But in one morning, it was gone. The corridor ahead seemed longer than usual, every echo of her boots reverberating through walls that had always felt neutral, safe, predictable. Her hands didn't tremble, but her pulse betrayed her composure steady, but heavier, like the dull beat of a war drum remembered too well. Inside the operations wing, officers parted quietly as she passed. No one met her eyes. Some avoided her entirely, as if proximity might draw unwanted attention from powers far above their pay grade. She returned to her office, shut the door, and finally exhaled. The breath shook as it left her. In the stillness, memories she had buried years ago stirred, blood in sand, radios screaming static, Cypher's last words echoing in her ear. She closed her eyes. The room faded. For a heartbeat, she was back there. Kandahar, the dust, the betrayal. She opened her eyes again. Not yet, she told herself, not now. Outside, the naval base continued as if nothing had happened. Trucks moved, jets roared across the bay, men and women saluted as the flag rippled overhead. The world kept spinning, but for her, something had shifted. Someone knocked. Enter. Captain Richardson stepped in, the door closing softly behind him. His expression was unreadable. I thought you might want to know, he said quietly. The Admiral's aide is still trying to contain the situation. Calls from Naval Special Warfare, Joint Command, the Pentagon. You've got every clearance officer in D.C. staring at their screens right now. Nivea didn't respond. She simply adjusted a folder on her desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Containment's a generous word. Richardson's lips twitched into something between a smile and a sigh. They'll be spinning this for weeks. I don't envy them. He hesitated. You all right? She met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear either, only exhaustion. I've been worse. He nodded slowly. I figured. Then softer, I didn't mean to expose you like that. I know. I just couldn't let him keep humiliating people for sport, she finished for him. You did what you thought was right, Captain. You didn't know who I was. Richardson studied her face for a long moment. No, but I knew what you were. What's that? Weak. The word hung between them. When he left, the silence felt different. He wasn't wrong, she wasn't weak. But strength came with its own gravity, and sometimes it pulled harder than anyone could carry. By evening, the official calls began. Naval Special Warfare Command first, then Joint Operations, and finally, the Chief of Naval Operations herself, Admiral Lysandra Vega. The message was brief. Report to Conference Room 4B at 700. Classified debriefing. She slept that night in fragments, flashes of memory colliding with the hum of the air conditioner and the faint thrum of ships out in the bay. When dawn came, she was already dressed. Conference Room 4B was empty except for Admiral Vega. No aides, no observers, just two women who had both spent their careers in the silence between wars. "Commander," Vega greeted, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." Nivea obeyed. Vega studied her for several seconds before speaking. "You've been a ghost for 5 years. We buried your name under 5 layers of clearance and placed you in logistics to keep you invisible. Do you know how hard it is to disappear someone like you?" "I didn't ask to be found, ma'am." Vega's lips curved slightly. "No one ever does, yet here we are." The older woman stood, moving toward the window. Outside, the sun glinted off the water, sharp and bright. "Admiral Thorne is being reassigned," Vega said. "Pacific Administrative Post. No command authority, no advancement prospects." "That seems appropriate." "He didn't know who you were." "That's not why it matters," Nivea said softly. Vega turned. "Then why does it matter?" "Because it shouldn't take a classified record to earn basic respect." The Admiral's gaze softened. "You always were better at seeing the simple truth than the rest of us." Silence lingered a moment before Vega spoke again. 5 years in logistics. Was it helping?" Nivea hesitated. "Some days, the others not so much." "The Kandahar operation still weighs on you." "It always will." Vega nodded. "It wasn't your fault." Nivea looked down at her hands. "They're still dead." Vega didn't argue. She just stood there, the wind outside rattling the glass faintly. "What do you want now, Commander?" "A transfer somewhere quiet. No publicity, no press." "You could rejoin Task Force Erebus. They'd take you back in a heartbeat." "I've seen enough war." "The world hasn't seen enough of you." That line hung in the air, a statement, not flattery. Vega stepped closer. "Take some leave. I'll have new orders in a week, somewhere you can breathe." When Nivea left the room, she carried no visible reaction. But inside, something cracked, not pain, not relief, just the quiet acknowledgement that her exile was over, whether she wanted it or not. That night she wrote a note, 7 words on a single piece of paper, folded it neatly, sealed it in an envelope marked for Admiral Thorne. She placed it on the courier's pile without a word. 2 days later, Thorne sat alone in his office, his career evaporating in front of him. The transfer orders had arrived by secure courier, stamped and sealed. Guam, Support Command. No power, no spotlight, no future. He'd spent years cultivating allies in Washington, playing chess with promotions and appointments. But one moment of arrogance had undone it all. A knock came at the door. His aide stepped in, looking pale. "Sir, Admiral Vega is here to see you." Before Thorne could respond, she entered. Her presence alone filled the room like a storm front. "Admiral Vega," he began, rising quickly. "I can explain." "I'm not interested in explanations." She didn't sit. Her voice was calm, but the undertone was pure steel. "The situation with Commander Winters is classified at the highest level. Your public display risked exposing an asset whose value to national security is beyond your comprehension." "I had no way of knowing." "That's precisely the point," Vega cut in sharply. "You weren't supposed to know, but you were supposed to treat every officer under your command with respect, regardless of rank or record. You failed both tests." Thorne swallowed hard. With respect, Admiral, my record speaks for itself, she interrupted again. 28 years of service without a single combat deployment. Promotions earned through proximity, not merit. You mistake intimidation for leadership. That's unfair, he muttered. Vega's eyes narrowed. Ask Commander Winters about fairness sometime. He had no reply. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a sealed envelope and set it on his desk. She left this for you. Vega turned and left without another word. Thorne stared at the envelope for a long time before breaking the seal. Inside, a small handwritten note. 7 words. Never mistake silence for weakness. N.W. His hands trembled slightly as he read it again. Silence for weakness. He leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused, the phrase looping in his mind until it burned. He'd built his career on noise, on speeches, on commands, on authority. And yet, it was silence that had undone him. Days turned to weeks. Thorne arrived on Guam under a gray, humid sky. His new office faced the ocean, but the view brought no peace. Routine reports, administrative minutiae, every decision meaningless in the grand machine. At night, he'd sit in the quiet and reread her note, sometimes aloud, as if the repetition might teach him something about himself. Across the world, Nivea sat on a bench overlooking the same ocean, hundreds of miles away, her posture calm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The same wind that touched his window brushed against her face. She thought of the note she'd written, not out of spite but closure. The words weren't for him alone. They were a truth she'd learned the hard way. That silence isn't surrender, it's survival. She rose from the bench, the sun bleeding into the horizon. The war was over for now, at least on paper, but somewhere deep inside, another one was waiting. That night's sleep didn't come easily. It hadn't for years. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of Kandahar again, of Cypher's hand slipping away, of dust clogging her lungs, of the radio going dead. But this time when she woke, the guilt wasn't as sharp, just heavy, familiar, but manageable. She looked out the window toward the harbor. Ships moved silently under the early light, their reflections wavering in the dark water. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd pack, start fresh, maybe somewhere no one knew her name, somewhere Reaper One could finally rest. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered the truth she didn't want to admit, that some names, some stories, never really rest. The base felt different once everyone knew. They still saluted when she passed, still called her Commander Winters, but the tone had changed. A hesitation in their voices, a space between the words. The same people who once spoke over her in meetings now stepped aside in hallways, their eyes full of quiet calculation. Recognition, fear, awe. It didn't matter which. None of them saw her anymore, only the ghost they'd been told she was. Reaper One. The name followed her like a shadow. She spent 5 years burying it under layers of normalcy, morning reports, uniform inspections, the quiet rhythm of logistics. But ghosts have long memories, and some names don't stay buried. In her small quarters overlooking the harbor, Nivea stood surrounded by open boxes. The apartment looked bare now, the way it had the day she moved in. 5 years distilled to a few files, a stack of uniforms, and a single duffel bag that could hold a life. The envelope from Admiral Vega still sat on her table. Inside were her new transfer papers, another post, another command, another chance to disappear. She picked them up, then set them down again. The sound of the ocean outside was steady. It always was. The sea didn't care about who you were or what you'd done. It only reflected what you carried. When the doorbell rang, it startled her. No one visited, ever. She opened the door to find Captain Richardson standing there in full uniform, his face weathered but kind. The man looked like he'd spent his entire career learning how to balance empathy with command. "Permission to enter, Commander?" he asked softly. She stepped aside. Of course. He walked in slowly, scanning the half-packed room, leaving us already. New orders. I thought as much. He clasped his hands behind his back, a quiet habit of older officers. I wanted to apologize, he began, for what happened in the wardroom. I didn't intend to make a spectacle of you. Nivea shook her head. No apology necessary. You stopped something that needed stopping. Still, he said, I should have known it wasn't my story to tell. She poured coffee, offered him a mug, then took one for herself. They stood in the small kitchen, steam curling between them like smoke from another life. Richardson sipped once, then said, I was in Bahrain when the al-Badri report came across our desks. The analysts said one operative eliminated the entire network alone after her team was compromised. We thought it was a myth. Nivea stared at the dark liquid in her cup. Myth sounds better than mistake. He frowned. You got the hostages out alive. You stopped an organization that killed thousands. How is that a mistake? She set the cup down carefully. Because my team died doing it. The room fell quiet. Richardson's expression softened. We all lose people. Not like that. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut. They trusted me to bring them home. Zephyr, Talon, Wraith, Cypher, 4 names, 4 call signs, 4 people I was responsible for. She looked up, eyes steady but hollow. I survived, they didn't. You tell me who deserves the legend. He didn't answer. Some questions weren't meant to be. After a long silence, she said, You want to know why I went into logistics, Captain? Because it's quiet. No one looks twice. I wanted a place where silence meant peace, not death. Richardson nodded slowly. You've earned the right to disappear, Commander, but you should know the Navy still needs people like you, not for your trigger discipline or your field record, for your example. My example. He smiled faintly. You remind people that strength doesn't always shout. She looked away, the words sinking in like water into dry soil. When he left, she watched him cross the courtyard until he disappeared behind the barracks. The faint ache in her chest surprised her. For years she'd made herself untouchable, but somehow, Richardson's simple decency had slipped past the armor. That night sleep was elusive again. She sat by the window, the base lights stretching across the bay like small constellations. The rhythmic crash of waves echoed faintly through the glass. Her shoulder twinged, an old reminder of Kandahar. The pain never really left. On cold nights it burned. She reached up, rubbing it absently, and her fingers brushed the faint outline of the scythe tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. The emblem of Task Force Erebus, the mark of Reaper 1. The call sign had once meant pride. Later it meant survival. Now it felt like weight. At 200, she gave up trying to sleep. She opened a small lockbox under her bed, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were mementos she swore she'd never look at again. An old patch with her team's insignia, a worn photograph taken before the Kandahar mission, and a single spent casing engraved with their initials. Zephyr, Talon, Wraith, Cypher. All gone. She held the casing between her fingers, feeling its coldness. That was the thing about loss. It never dulled, only settled deeper into the bones. The next morning, she packed the box away again and finished sealing her last crate. By noon, the apartment was empty. Only the echo of her footsteps remained. At the base gate, she handed in her access badge. The guard saluted her, posture stiff, eyes uncertain. He didn't know if he was saluting a commander or a legend. She didn't correct him. Outside the fence line, the air felt different, cleaner, colder. She took one last look at the ships lined along the harbor, gray silhouettes against the horizon, and started walking toward the small off-base apartment Admiral Vega had arranged. The transition was supposed to be temporary. A few months of rest, maybe a desk post somewhere remote, but deep down she knew nothing about her life was temporary anymore. Once you became a ghost, you stayed one. 3 days passed. She unpacked. She ran along the shore at dawn. She tried to convince herself that quiet was enough. Then the call came. An unknown number. Secure line, no voice on the first ring, just silence. On the second she answered, Winters. The line clicked, then a familiar voice gravelly controlled, too calm to be casual. Commander Admiral Vega. She straightened instinctively. Ma'am. There's been some fallout, Vega said. Your clearance triggered automatic reactivation. The Pentagon wants a review. Of what? Of you. Nivea's jaw tightened. That seems unnecessary. Agreed, but this isn't a request. They want to verify all Tier 1 operatives marked inactive. After Thorne accessed your file, everything connected to Task Force Erebus lit up like a Christmas tree. So I'm officially alive again. For now, Vega replied, but I'd advise you to keep your head down. The fewer eyes on you, the better. Nivea's lips curved slightly. That's always been my specialty. Not anymore, Vega said quietly. They're talking about reinstating your clearance fully. There's chatter about reconstituting Erebus. The words landed like a blow. That task force doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it should, Vega said. Think about it. The line went dead. Nivea sat for a long time, the phone still in her hand. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Reconstituting Erebus. The thought clawed at her chest. She remembered the firefight in Kandahar, the chaos, the betrayal, the sudden loss of everything that defined her. The idea of returning to that world was unthinkable, and yet a small, treacherous part of her heart stirred. Purpose. It had been a long time since she'd felt it. Later that evening she walked down to the water. The tide was high, the air sharp with salt. Waves crashed against the rocks, scattering white spray against her boots. She crouched and picked up a flat stone, running her thumb over its smooth surface before tossing it across the water. It skipped once, twice, then sank. 4 jumps, she whispered, 1 for each of you. The wind carried her voice away. Behind her, footsteps crunched against gravel, a voice deep, familiar. Talking to ghosts again, Commander. She turned. Admiral Vega stood there, hands in her coat pockets. Couldn't sleep? Nivea asked. Never could, Vega replied. You learn to live with it. They stood side by side for a while, watching the waves roll in. 2 soldiers who traded one war for another, the internal kind. Vega spoke softly. You know, when I first read your Kandahar report, I thought it was fiction. No one should have survived that, but you did. You carried 3 hostages out while wounded, held off a platoon, then walked 4 miles to extraction. Why logistics, Nivea? Because I didn't want to be remembered for the killing, she said simply. I wanted to be useful in ways that didn't leave blood on my hands. Vega nodded, the wind catching her gray hair. Maybe usefulness and redemption aren't always the same thing. Maybe not. The Admiral glanced at her. When they call again, and they will at least hear them out, you don't have to say yes, but don't hide from what you are. And what's that, ma'am? A survivor, Vega said. Not just of Kandahar, of everything that comes after. The Admiral turned and walked away, her boots crunching softly on the path. Nivea stayed until the horizon faded into night. When she finally went inside, the room felt smaller somehow, the quiet no longer comforting. She reached for the old lockbox again, this time not to hide it. She opened it and set the patch of Task Force Erebus on her desk. The black scythe stared back at her, simple and sharp. Her reflection in the window overlapped with it, 2 silhouettes merging. She didn't know what the future held, but something had awakened. Not pride, not vengeance, something deeper, unfinished. The next morning she woke before dawn, pulled on her running shoes and stepped into the fog. The air was heavy with salt and promise. The world was quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't hiding her anymore. It was waiting. The letter from Washington arrived without ceremony. No seals, no courier in dress uniform, just a brown envelope slid under her door sometime before dawn. Inside, a single line typed in plain font. Pentagon, Tuesday, 900 Admiral Corbin. No signature, no explanation. She sat at the small kitchen table staring at it while her coffee went cold. She expected this eventually. The second Admiral Vega had hinted at reactivated clearance. Still, seeing it in print made her chest tighten. 5 years of silence, 5 years of pretending to be ordinary, and now the ghosts wanted her back. By noon she was on a flight north, the seat belt pressing against the scar tissue on her shoulder. The ache came with altitude, a reminder that her body had never really healed, just learned to function around the damage. She stared out the window as clouds swallowed the plane, her reflection hovering faintly in the glass. In Washington, rain slicked the streets like oil. Security checkpoints swallowed her credentials without comment. A Tier 1 ID still opened doors most admirals couldn't touch. The Pentagon corridors smelled of metal polish and recycled air. Every echo sounded deliberate. Admiral Corbin was waiting in a small, windowless conference room. He was older now, the lines around his eyes carved by decades of classified decisions and sleepless nights. But his voice was exactly as she remembered. "Commander Winters," he said quietly, "or should I say Reaper One?" She stood at attention out of habit. "Prefer Winters, sir." He gave a small nod and gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit. You've earned the right not to salute." She sat back straight, eyes steady. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Corbin studied her for a long moment before sliding a folder across the table. The cover read, "Operation Black Scythe, DCLASSAFID in part." Her throat went dry. "Kandahar." "Yes." She hesitated before touching it. The folder felt heavier than paper should. Corbin folded his hands. "You deserve to know the full truth. You were never told what went wrong that day. The official report blamed bad intelligence, local interference, the usual excuses. It wasn't the truth." Her eyes lifted. "Then what was?" He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd carried for too long. "The source who provided the hostage coordinates, the one you trusted, sold them. He was working for a Russian private contractor, Alexei Volkov." She froze. The name was unfamiliar, but the betrayal was not. "He sold us out." "Yes, for money, influence, revenge. Doesn't matter. What matters is he's resurfaced. Leading his own network now, paramilitary, ex-Spetsnaz, former Wagner. They've acquired chemical agents. Our intel says he's planning coordinated strikes on U.S. installations in the Gulf region." "And you want me to go after him?" Corbin's silence was answer enough. She leaned back, pulse steady but eyes hardening. "Why me? There are plenty of teams who can do this." "Because he knows you," Corbin said. "And you know him. He studied your tactics in Kandahar. You were his test case. You're the one operator he won't see coming twice." She looked down at the folder. The grain of the paper blurred as the room seemed to tilt slightly. Kandahar had never left her. It lived in her bones, in the quiet hours of the night when the ghosts whispered her failures back to her. And now they wanted her to reopen that wound. Corbin continued, "You'd have full authority over mission planning. Choose your team, your methods. No oversight committee. I'll back you personally." Her jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" "Then someone else dies chasing your unfinished war." The words hit harder than he intended. He saw it and immediately softened. "Nivea, this isn't a demand. It's an opportunity to finish what others started." She pushed the folder away slightly. "Finishing doesn't always mean peace." "No," he agreed, "but sometimes it means clarity." For a long time she said nothing. The rain outside beat faintly against the walls, muffled by layers of concrete. Finally she whispered, "I'll think about it." That's all I ask. As she rose to leave, Corbin added quietly, "There's a line from Vega. She said to remind you silence isn't the same as healing." Nivea paused at the door. "Tell her she's right, but sometimes it's the only way to breathe." She left without looking back. The hotel room was cold that night. The hum of the city outside barely reached through the triple-sealed windows. She sat on the bed with the folder open in front of her. Photographs, maps, reports. And then the last page, a casualty list from Kandahar. Her team: Zephyr, Talon, Wraith, Cypher. 4 names typed in black ink. 4 soldiers she dragged through hell and couldn't save. Her vision blurred for a moment, but no tears came. She spent them all years ago. The file closed softly under her hand. She stared at the ceiling until dawn. 2 days later, she was standing on the airfield at Coronado, the Pacific wind cutting through her uniform. Admiral Corbin met her beside a waiting transport, clipboard tucked under one arm. "I take it your presence here means yes," he said. "Conditionally," she replied. "I choose my team. I plan the operation. No politicians breathing down our necks." "Agreed." "One more thing," she added. "When this is over, I get everything. The full Kandahar file, no redactions." Corbin nodded once. "Done." He extended a hand. "Welcome back, Commander." She hesitated before taking it. His grip was firm, respectful, the handshake of someone who understood what it cost her to accept. The engines roared behind them as the transport prepared for takeoff. She climbed aboard and strapped in, the seat vibrating beneath her. The familiar scent of hydraulic fluid and canvas straps filled her lungs. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt that old stillness return, the focus that lived between heartbeat and decision. Reaper 1 wasn't back yet, but she was waking. Washington again. The Pentagon's inner corridors this time deeper, quieter, more guarded. A biometric scanner flashed green at her touch. Inside the briefing room, 5 people waited. Colonel Marcus Webb from Delta Force, CIA liaison Vanessa Diaz, Naval Intelligence Commander Elliot Riker, British SAS Captain Lawrence Hayes, and Dr. Amani Carter, Psychological Operations. Corbin stood at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Commander Nivea Winters. Most of you know the legend. Today you'll meet the reality." Webb, tall and dark-skinned, rose first. "Reaper 1 in the flesh," he said with a respectful nod. "Didn't think the stories were true." "They rarely are," she answered. He smiled faintly. "I was on the quick reaction force for your Kandahar extraction. You were unconscious when we pulled you out. Good to finally meet properly." "Thank you," she said quietly. Corbin gestured to the holographic display in the center of the table. Satellite imagery flickered to life. Mountain ranges, compounds, convoy routes. "Our target," Corbin began, "is Alexei Volkov, alias the Architect. Former Spetsnaz, then Wagner Group. He's built a private army operating in the Afghan-Pakistani border region. Intelligence confirms possession of nerve agents VX series." Diaz took over. "We can't strike from the air, the bunkers are reinforced, and we need confirmation of containment before destruction." "So insertion and capture," Nivea said. "No collateral." "Precisely," Corbin replied. "Precision strike, 6-person team. You, Webb, Hayes, and 3 Tier 1 operators of your choosing." Her brow furrowed. 6, that's light. "Stealth over size. You'll have remote surveillance support only. No satellites during exfil, the region, under electronic blackout." She studied the topography on the hologram, tracing possible ingress routes, escape corridors, kill zones. Her mind slipped into its old rhythm, calculating risk, angles, timing. It scared her a little how natural it felt. Then Diaz said quietly, "There's more. Volkov was the intelligence source for Kandahar." The room went silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Nivea's eyes lifted slowly to Corbin. "You knew." "We confirmed it 3 months ago," he admitted. "We needed proof before bringing you in." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "All these years, I thought it was my fault." "It wasn't," Corbin said. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "I need air." The corridor outside was cold and sterile. She leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her shoulder as if the pain there could ground her. For 5 years, she'd carried guilt like a weapon turned inward, every night replaying decisions, wondering what she could have done differently. And now the truth: betrayal, not failure. Corbin joined her quietly, saying nothing for several seconds. Then, "I'm sorry you had to learn it this way." "Were you ever going to tell me if you didn't need me?" He hesitated. "Eventually." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Honesty doesn't come naturally to you, Admiral." "Not in this business." He looked at her then, really looked at the woman who'd lost everything and still stood unbroken. "You were hidden in plain sight while we hunted ghosts. Now the ghost has a face." She met his gaze again, calmer now. "Then let's finish it." "Just like that." "Just like that," she said. "But I choose my team, and when it's over I want the truth, all of it." Corbin nodded. "You'll have it." As she walked away, the air around her seemed to shift. The weight of guilt hadn't lifted, but it had direction now. Purpose. For years, silence had been her armor. Now it would be her weapon. Reaper One was coming out of the dark again. Not for glory, not for revenge, but for something harder to define. Justice. The Pacific air tasted like memory, salt, metal, and adrenaline. 3 weeks after Washington, Coronado Beach was alive with shouts, pounding surf, and the rhythm of SEAL candidates being broken and rebuilt by the tide. The place smelled like sweat and seawater and discipline. The kind of place where legends were born and sanity came to die. Commander Nivea Winters stood on the bluff overlooking the course, her hands in her jacket pockets, the black scythe insignia barely visible beneath her collar. Below, rows of trainees crawled through wet sand, faces caked in mud. Every yell of an instructor carried the same message she once lived by: the ocean doesn't forgive weakness. She hadn't planned to return here, but the past had a way of looping back when you least expected it. "Commander Winters," a voice called behind her. Nivea turned. Admiral Corbin approached, his hat tucked under one arm. "They're ready for you inside, the final 3 candidates." She nodded once, understood. He watched her a moment, as if weighing whether to say something. "You haven't changed much," he said finally. "I've aged 5 years and 2 lifetimes, Admiral." "Still direct as ever." She gave a faint smile. "You didn't call me back for small talk." "No," he admitted. "I called you back to build something the world thought was dead." The candidate evaluation room was sparse. 3 chairs, 3 dossiers, 1 table. Each file had been hand-picked from across branches, operators with clean records, questionable pasts, or the kind of resilience that didn't make it onto paper. She flipped open the first file. Lieutenant Chiara Diaz, SEAL, former EOD specialist, fluent in Farsi and Arabic. Disciplinary notes: insubordination, disregard for authority, multiple commendations for field initiative. A fighter, raw but sharp. The second file. Chief Petty Officer Owen Vale, Navy Intel, quiet, observant, the kind of operator who saw everything and said nothing. She respected that. The third. Sergeant Major Cole Anders, Marine Raider, decorated, survived 3 ambushes and 1 divorce. His personnel notes described him as recklessly loyal. That too was useful. Corbin leaned against the doorframe as she read. Thoughts? "They're rough," she said, "but I've seen worse turn into legends." "Then they're yours." Nivea closed the last file. "They'll need to understand this isn't a standard op." "They'll follow you," Corbin said. "They just don't know it yet." She met them the next morning in the training hangar. No introduction ceremony. No rank pulled. Just four people standing in a circle surrounded by shadows and the faint smell of oil. Diaz was the first to speak. So it's true, Reaper One's back. Nivea didn't confirm it. You can call me Commander Winters. Call signs belong to missions, not myths. Diaz smirked, fair enough. Anders crossed his arms. So, what's the job? They said classified, Tier 1 level. Didn't mention who's leading. They didn't need to, Vale said quietly. His eyes, pale, calculating, had the look of someone who'd already guessed. We wouldn't be here otherwise. Nivea met his gaze. Correct. You're not here for rank. You're here because every one of you knows what it's like to be left behind. Silence followed. Even Diaz's defiant grin faded a little. You'll receive full mission parameters when I'm sure we're ready. Until then, training begins at 500. Physical endurance, adaptive tactics, and silence discipline. Silence discipline, Anders asked. It's what keeps you alive, she said. The first week broke them. The second rebuilt them. By the third, they were moving like one body. In the hangar, in the surf, in the darkened ranges at dawn, Nivea pushed them past exhaustion. Not through screaming or bravado, through precision. Every command was quiet, measured, and absolute. She watched how they moved, how they compensated for one another's flaws. Diaz had instinct but lacked patience. Vale had patience but carried ghosts. Anders hid his fear behind humor. Each one reflected a piece of her former team. Zephyr's daring, Talon's calm, Wraith's focus, Cypher's faith. It was unsettling how easily the memories aligned. Sometimes she caught herself calling Vale Wraith under her breath. The first time it happened, he didn't react. Maybe he understood. Late one night, after drills, Diaz lingered. Permission to ask something personal, ma'am. Nivea nodded. Is it true what they said? That in Kandahar, you carried your comms officer 4 miles to the extraction zone after being shot? Nivea didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the dark water beyond the hangar doors. Some stories grow in the telling, she said softly, but the truth is simpler. He was dying. I didn't want him to die alone. Diaz's throat tightened. Why'd you come back then? You could have stayed buried. Because sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep moving. Diaz nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. A month later, their readiness review came through. Every metric exceeded expectation. Corbin authorized the deployment under the codename Operation Silent Vector. Their target, Volkov's compound deep in the Hindu Kush, heavily fortified, beyond air support range. Insertion by halo jump, extraction uncertain. The odds, Corbin admitted privately, were bad. Nivea didn't flinch, so were Kandahar's. The night before departure, she sat alone in the armory. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the walls lined with rifles and gear. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel of a weapon case, hair shorter now, face leaner, eyes older. She took the scythe insignia from her jacket pocket and set it on the table. Its edges were smooth from years of wear. She could almost hear their voices, Zephyr teasing her about being too serious, Talon's dry humor, Wraith's quiet prayers before every mission, Cypher humming off-key to calm his nerves. The silence between them still hurt. But pain, she'd learned, was proof that you once cared. Her fingers brushed the insignia. We're going back, she whispered, but this time we finish it. Dawn came gray and heavy. The team assembled by the transport, their gear packed tight, parachutes slung across their backs. The air buzzed with that strange mix of adrenaline and calm that always preceded danger. Corbin stood nearby watching. You sure about this? He asked quietly. No, Nivea said, but it's necessary. He nodded. If you succeed, the Pentagon will pretend they planned it. If you fail, then it'll never exist, she finished. He handed her a small, secure drive. The complete Kandahar file, every line, every truth for after. After, she echoed. They boarded the transport. Engines roared to life. The ramp closed. Inside the dim cabin, Diaz checked her altimeter. Vale loaded his rifle. Anders muttered a prayer to no one in particular. Nivea looked around at them, 3 soldiers, each carrying their own scars, trusting her with their lives. It was a trust she didn't take lightly. She stood near the rear hatch, gripping the overhead rail as the aircraft climbed. Clouds swallowed them. Vale leaned closer. "Ma'am," he said over the noise, "just so I know, what do we call you out there?" Nivea's gaze held his. For a long moment the only sound was the wind tearing past the fuselage. Then she said, quietly, "Call me Reaper 1. Hours later, under a moonless sky, the plane leveled off over the mountains of northern Afghanistan. The altimeter blinked red. Diaz's voice came through the comms. "Wind stable. Drop zone 2 clicks northeast of the ridge. Visibility near 0. "Perfect," Nivea replied. She stepped to the open hatch. The roar of air hit her face, sharp and alive. Below, darkness, endless and waiting. For a second she hesitated, not from fear but from the sudden flood of memory, the same drop years ago, same silence before chaos. Only this time she wasn't running from ghosts. She was chasing them. "On my mark," she said, 3, 2, 1. The team jumped. Cold wind tore against her skin as the world tilted into freefall. The earth rushed up like a whisper. Her altimeter flashed. She pulled the chute. The jolt snapped her back into the present, the fabric snapping open, the sudden deceleration, the faint hiss of wind through nylon. Below, the mountains rose like teeth. She landed silently on rocky ground, rolled, and came up crouched. Her night vision lenses painted the world in shades of green. "Team report," she whispered. "Diaz green. Vale green. Anders green." The quiet clicked through comms like heartbeat rhythm. She looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the man who destroyed her team was breathing borrowed air. Nivea adjusted her rifle, checked her compass, and started forward. Behind her, the others followed, silent shadows moving through the dark. The mission had begun. And for the first time in years, Commander Nivea Winters didn't feel broken. She felt alive. The mountains swallowed sound. Wind hissed through stone corridors carved by centuries, but even that felt distant, muffled, cautious, as if the land itself feared what was coming. Nivea Winters crouched behind a ridge of shale, the frost crunching faintly beneath her glove. The moon hung low and bloodless, casting thin silver across the valley floor below. Through her scope, the compound glimmered with artificial order, fences, floodlights, patrols moving in 4-minute intervals. "Movement pattern confirmed," Vale whispered beside her. His breath fogged briefly, then vanished. 2 guards per tower, thermal sensors along the west approach. Diaz adjusted the small drone pad on her forearm. No radio chatter. They're running closed-loop comms, fiber line only. "Anders?" Nivea asked quietly. He scanned the horizon. "Sniper overwatch on the north ridge. Look Spetsnaz, good posture." Nivea nodded once. "Then we go south, shadow side, we breach through the maintenance tunnel." Diaz frowned. "That's a narrow route for 4 people. "Exactly," Nivea said. "No one's watching it." The plan had been simple on paper. Infiltrate, locate Volkov, secure or destroy the chemical agents, extract before dawn. But simplicity died the moment boots hit soil. Out here, nothing was simple. "Time check," Vale murmured. 200, Anders replied. Nivea tightened her harness, feeling the familiar calm slide into place, the stillness before action. She raised a gloved hand. "Let's move." They slipped down the ridge like smoke. Every step had weight, every rock could betray them. The valley floor was colder than expected. the kind of cold that cut through fabric and memory alike. The compound loomed ahead, its geometry harsh against the natural curves of the mountain. Vale was first to reach the outer fence. He knelt, clipped a small bypass tool to the data line running beneath the ground sensors, and watched the light blink from red to green. Clear. Diaz slid through first, followed by Anders. Nivea went last, her rifle cradled low, eyes sweeping for movement. They hugged the wall, following it to the maintenance tunnel, a rust-streaked metal door half buried under rock and frost. The keypad blinked faintly. Diaz pulled a portable decryptor from her pack, connecting the leads. "Give me 30 seconds." "You have 20, Nivea said. Diaz grinned through the tension. "You're all heart, Commander." 15. The lock clicked open at 12. Inside, the tunnel reeked of oil and ammonia. Narrow, low ceiling, cables running along both sides. The silence deepened, the kind that made your heartbeat sound too loud. Anders took point, flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the dark. No motion, thermals clear. Vale checked his scanner. Compound power grid runs through this junction. We could cut it, go dark. Nivea shook her head. "Not yet. Lights off will draw attention. We need invisibility, not chaos." They reached a service ladder leading upward. Nivea signaled halt, then turned to the team. "This is where we separate. Anders, your overwatch once we breach, suppress any response from perimeter units. Diaz, you and Vale secure the chemical storage. I'll handle Volkov." "Alone?" Anders asked. She met his eyes. "He knows me, I want him to see me." Something in her voice silenced any argument. They climbed. The ladder opened into a dimly lit corridor lined with industrial piping. The air smelled of rust and solvent. From above came the faint echo of boots, radios, distant laughter, the normal sound of men who thought they were safe. Nivea raised her hand, masks on. They pulled their balaclavas into place. 4 shadows became 3, then 2, as Anders split off toward the south catwalk. Nivea led Diaz and Vale deeper into the facility. Every door opened into another maze of corridors and steel. Each corner carried the weight of déjà vu, like Kandahar's tunnels reborn in colder stone. A memory flickered unbidden. Cipher bleeding out in the dust, whispering, "You have to finish it." She pushed it away. Vale halted at a junction, infrared tripwires ahead. Diaz slid to the floor, tracing the laser grid with her optic. 2 overlapping nets. Whoever designed this knew their stuff. "Bypass?" Nivea asked. Diaz smiled under her mask. "Always." She threaded a thin filament through the beams, looping it to the secondary emitter. The lights blinked twice, then steadied. Path ghosted. They slipped through. At the end of the hall, a reinforced door waited, hazard markings stenciled in Cyrillic. "Chemical storage." "This is us," Diaz whispered. Nivea nodded. 2 minutes. Retrieve samples and set demolition charges. Vale watched the door. "What about you?" Diaz asked. "Volkov's office is 1 floor up." Diaz hesitated. "Commander, I'll meet you at Exfil Point Bravo." She was already moving before Diaz could argue. The upper floor smelled of cordite and antiseptic. Desks lined in military precision, maps pinned to walls, computers glowing softly in the dark. Volkov's office was at the end of the corridor, door ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the floor. Nivea stepped inside. He was there exactly as the intel photo showed, older, thicker, but the same cold eyes. He sat behind a metal desk, a pistol resting beside a half-empty glass. He didn't look surprised. "Reaper 1, he said in accented English. "I was wondering how long it would take them to send you." She stayed by the door, weapon raised. "You sold us out." He smiled faintly. "I gave information to those who paid for it. You knew the game." "They weren't soldiers, they were my family." Volkov shrugged. "Collateral, you survived, you should thank me. Your legend lives because of me. Her finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped. Killing him here would be easy, but easy wasn't justice. Where are the agents? She demanded. Destroyed, he lied smoothly. She fired once into the desk. Papers exploded upward, smoke curling through the air. Where? He flinched, then laughed. You haven't changed. Always the ghost who thinks silence makes her holy. Her pulse slowed. Silence isn't holiness, she said quietly. It's restraint. Before he could answer, a distant explosion rocked the floor. Diaz's charges. The alarms blared, red lights flashing. Volkov grabbed for his weapon, too slow. Nivea's shot hit his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed into the desk, blood blooming across his shirt. Stay down, she ordered, moving forward, binding his arm with a zip tie. Her comm crackled. Commander, it's Diaz, charges set, agents destroyed, but we've got company, multiple hostiles inbound. Understood, Nivea said. She pulled Volkov upright. You're coming with me. He sneered through pain. You think you can drag me out of here alive? Alive isn't the plan. The corridors erupted with gunfire. Anders' sniper rounds cracked through the steel rafters, cutting down guards before they reached the storage wing. Diaz and Vale covered the retreat, moving in tight formation. Nivea dragged Volkov through smoke and flashing lights. Sirens painted everything red. Extraction point Bravo in 3 minutes, Vale shouted. They reached the tunnel hatch just as another squad rounded the corner. Bullets sparked off pipes, echoing like thunder. Down, Diaz yelled. She threw a flashbang. White light swallowed the hall. Nivea shoved Volkov through the tunnel entrance, followed by Vale and Diaz. The blast door slammed behind them. They ran, boots pounding metal grates, lungs burning. At the far end, Anders waited by the exit with the signal beacon ready. Birds inbound, he shouted over the roar of the approaching rotor. A helicopter skimmed the ridge, searchlight slicing through dust and snow. Vale covered the rear as the others climbed the ladder. Diaz went first, Anders next. Nivea shoved Volkov up behind them, his curses drowned by the engine's howl. When she reached the top, hands grabbed her arms, Anders pulling, Diaz firing into the dark below. The helicopter lurched as they cleared the lip. Nivea hauled herself inside, slamming the side door shut. Go, she yelled. The pilot banked hard, engine straining. Below, the compound bloomed in orange fire as the secondary charges detonated. Shockwaves rippled through the valley, shaking the aircraft. Volkov groaned, bleeding but alive. Diaz glared at him. We should have left him. Nivea stared out the window at the flames below. No, he answers for what he did. Vale exhaled shakily. Mission success. No, Nivea said softly, just closure. Hours later, at the forward operations base, the debrief felt unreal. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only exhaustion and the quiet ringing of memory. Medical techs cleaned the blood from her gloves. Volkov was already in custody, bound, sedated, silent. Diaz limped past with a bandaged arm. Next time, Commander, she said, you pick the easy job. Nivea managed the faintest smile. There's no such thing. When the others finally drifted to rest, she stepped outside the tent. The horizon glowed faintly with dawn. The desert wind carried a trace of burnt metal. She stood there for a long time, watching the first light spill over the mountains. Kandahar had haunted her for years, the unanswered questions, the weight of guilt. But tonight, in the cold silence after fire, something shifted. Not peace, not forgiveness, something smaller but real. Release. Inside her chest, the ache was still there but lighter. For the first time, the ghosts were quiet. She whispered to the wind, we finished it. The breeze moved past her face like a nod. Behind her, Corbin approached quietly. Volkov's being flown to The Hague. You did good work. She didn't look back. We did what was necessary. He studied her silhouette against the dawn. "What will you do now?" "Breathe," she said. Corbin smiled faintly. "That's a start." She turned, meeting his gaze. "When I'm done breathing, Admiral, maybe I'll see where silence leads next." And with that, Commander Nivea Winters, Reaper 1, walked into the morning light, the wind carrying away the last echoes of the mountain fire. The flight home was quieter than war ever allowed. No engine screaming, no gunfire, no adrenaline, just the low hum of altitude and the sound of her own thoughts. Commander Nivea Winters sat by the small window of the military transport, eyes fixed on the clouds below. The world looked too peaceful from up here, as if the earth itself had chosen to forget what happened in its shadows. Across the aisle, Diaz slept against her harness, her bandaged arm twitching slightly with each turn of the aircraft. Anders stared blankly at a tablet, its screen dark. Vale had removed his headset, gaze lost somewhere between fatigue and disbelief. They'd all made it back, against odds, against reason. But survival came with a strange weight, the kind that pressed heavier than loss. The kind that whispered, "Now what?" When the wheels hit the tarmac at Andrews, dawn was breaking again. Same pale light, different horizon. Washington waited. Admiral Corbin's office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. He was reading something when Nivea entered, a report she recognized before she saw the header. Operation Silent Vector, Preliminary Assessment. "Sit," he said. She stayed standing. "How bad?" He exhaled through his nose. "Depends who you ask. Officially, it's a success. Volkov in custody, nerve agents destroyed, 0 civilian casualties." "And unofficially?" He hesitated. "The Joint Oversight Committee is calling for inquiry, unauthorized engagement, violation of airspace treaties. They want a name to blame." Her eyes didn't waver. "Mine." Corbin met her gaze, weary but not surprised. "You knew this might happen." "I didn't care." He smiled faintly. "Still don't, do you?" "No." He leaned back. "The Pentagon doesn't like ghosts walking their halls, Winters. You scare them. They can't control what they didn't create." She folded her hands behind her back. "What happens to the team?" "They'll be reassigned under protective clearance. You won't see them again, for their safety and yours." Something twisted quietly inside her. They fought as one heartbeat, and now, just like that, the rhythm stopped. "And Volkov?" she asked. "He's being held in a NATO black site outside Prague," Corbin said. "Interrogations start tomorrow. He's talking slowly. He named buyers, routes, even hinted at officials on our side." Her eyes narrowed. "Officials?" Corbin nodded grimly. "Which is why you're here. There's something you need to hear." He opened a drawer, withdrew a small recorder and pressed play. The voice that emerged was rough, accented but clear. "I didn't betray her for money," Volkov said. "I was told to, ordered. Her coordinates came from higher command, someone inside your own Pentagon." The words hit like a shot. Nivea felt her pulse slow, not quicken, the kind of stillness that came when truth was too heavy for emotion. "Who?" she asked. "Name redacted in the transcript," Corbin said quietly. But Volkov hinted at initials, AC. Her eyes lifted to his. He didn't blink. "You think it's me," he said, almost amused. "I think I stopped trusting initials years ago." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Corbin sighed. "I didn't sell you out, Commander, but someone did. Someone who had access to your deployment orders, your coordinates, your comms encryption. And you're letting them sit behind a desk while we bury people." His jaw tightened. "You think I like this?" "I think you learn to live with it." Corbin's expression hardened. "Careful, Winters. The Navy gave you your silence. Don't mistake it for immunity." She stared at him for a long moment. "If I ever wanted immunity, Admiral, I wouldn't have come back." Then she turned and walked out. Rain fell over Arlington that evening. soft, relentless, the kind that blurred the city lights and made the world feel quieter than it was. She walked alone among the rows of white headstones, the umbrella tucked beneath her arm, rain collecting on her jacket. Her boots sank slightly in the soaked grass. She stopped at 4 markers, side by side. Zephyr, Talon, Wraith, Cipher. Their names carved into marble, each one a year that never ended. She crouched, setting her gloved hand against the cold stone. "We finished it," she whispered, "but it's not clean, it never is." The rain slid down her face. She couldn't tell if it was water or tears. For years she'd carried guilt like armor. Now, stripped of it, she felt something worse, emptiness. She looked up at the gray sky. What did we even save? No answer came, only the wind sighing through the trees. Sometimes silence wasn't comfort, it was judgment. Later that night, a secure call came through. No ID, no name, just static, then a voice. "Reaper 1. She froze. It was Corbin. "Who is this?" "Someone who believes the truth still matters." Volkov wasn't lying. The initials he gave, AC, it was Corbin. She stood slowly, tension coiling through her shoulders. "Then who?" "Check your Kandahar file, page 72, you'll see." The line cut. She pulled the encrypted drive from her jacket, slotting it into the laptop. The Kandahar file opened in a cascade of classified headers. Her cursor scrolled to page 72. Mission Directive, Authorization Clearance, Admiral Alastair Cormac. Her stomach dropped. Cormac, head of Joint Intelligence Operations. The man who'd briefed her before Kandahar. The one who'd promised extraction support. The same man now sitting on the Oversight Committee investigating her mission. She sat back, staring at the screen as the rain drummed against the window. Her hands trembled not with fear but with something colder, purpose. They buried her once. They'd lied, rewritten, erased. Now she had proof. But proof was dangerous. At 200, she drove to the waterfront pier, the city lights behind her glowing faintly through fog. Her reflection wavered in the black water. Corbin was already there, standing by the railing, hands clasped behind his back. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You told me once," she replied, "that silence isn't healing, it's restraint. You were right, but there's a difference between restraint and surrender." He studied her face. "You found something." Cormac signed the order. Corbin's expression didn't change, but his eyes did, a flicker, small but unmistakable. "You knew." "I suspected," he said quietly, "but without evidence. You had me walk into that compound, not knowing it was his betrayal that killed them." Corbin turned toward the water. "If I'd told you, you would have gone rogue." "I went rogue anyway." He sighed. "I tried to protect you from the system, Winters. Not because you needed saving, but because it needed cleansing, and that takes time." Her voice hardened. "Time costs lives." He nodded slowly. "And sometimes careers." For a long while, neither spoke, only the sound of waves lapping against the pier. Finally, she said, "He's going to bury it again, isn't he?" Corbin's jaw worked. "He'll try. Then I'll make sure he doesn't." He looked at her, almost pleading. "You do this, you'll burn everything. Clearance, record, rank." "I lost those a long time ago." Her tone was calm, the same calm she'd had before every mission, when fear no longer mattered because purpose outweighed it. Corbin nodded once, the faintest trace of pride in his eyes. "What do you need?" "Access to the committee session tomorrow," she said, "and 5 minutes before Cormac takes the floor." He didn't hesitate. "You'll have it." She turned to leave. "Winters," he said quietly. She looked back. "Be careful what you expose. Truth doesn't always save people. Sometimes it just makes them see." She gave a small, sad smile. Maybe seeing is enough. The next morning, the Pentagon auditorium was filled with quiet power. Medals, suits, eyes that calculated everything. The Oversight Committee session began with Admiral Cormac's voice echoing through the chamber. Operation Silent Vector was a reckless action, he declared. Unsanctioned. Commander Winters acted beyond her authority. The doors opened. She stepped inside. Every head turned, cameras pivoted. Nivea walked down the aisle in full uniform. No medals, no insignia, just the quiet authority of presence. Cormac faltered mid-sentence. "Commander Winters, you are not authorized." "Authorization came from you," she said, her voice low but cutting through the hall like a blade. A murmur rippled through the room. She reached the podium and placed a folder on the table. "Page 72, she said. "Kandahar, your signature." Cormac's face drained of color. "You sold out your own operators," she continued, her voice steady. "Then buried the truth under classified ink. Those men died believing they failed. They didn't. You did." Security moved uncertainly, waiting for orders. None came. She looked around the room at the men and women who lived behind closed doors and secure codes. You want silence because it keeps the machine running. But silence without honor isn't discipline. It's decay. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then she stepped back, leaving the folder where it lay. "Do what you will," she said, "but know this, you can bury names, not ghosts." And with that she walked out. Outside the sun was bright, too bright. Reporters swarmed. Voices shouted her name, questions flew like debris. She kept walking. Somewhere behind her, alarms were ringing, not sirens, but the quiet collapse of reputations. Corbin met her by the gate, eyes unreadable. "You realize what you've just done?" "Yes," she said softly, "ended his career instantly." Corbin exhaled a laugh, part disbelief, part admiration. Reaper One indeed. She looked past him toward the sky, where a single jet contrail drew a white line across the blue. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." For 48 hours, the world whispered her name. Not in celebration, not in condemnation, just in disbelief. Headlines bled across every defense wire and news crawl. Admiral Cormac, under investigation for war crimes. Reaper 1 RETURNS, and REVEALS Pentagon cover-up. Navy Commander, EXPOSES Operational Betrayal. Reporters camped outside her apartment in Arlington. Her phone never stopped ringing, unknown numbers, blocked calls, foreign press, even old comrades from units that didn't officially exist. Everyone wanted a quote, a confession, a soundbite. She gave them nothing. Silence had always been her truest language. But inside, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, alive. Every action had a cost, and she was starting to feel the bill come due. 2 days after the hearing, she received a summons, not from Corbin this time, but from the Department of Defense. "Internal review," the letter said. "Formal inquiry into conduct, clearance, and classification breach." She folded the paper neatly, set it on the kitchen counter, and went back to staring out the window. Below, the Potomac shimmered in early morning light. Joggers passed. A child fed ducks by the water. The world kept spinning, indifferent to heroism or scandal. She wondered, not for the first time, whether any of it had been worth it. The faces came back to her, Zephyr laughing in the dust, Talon arguing over music, Cypher praying quietly before missions, Wraith's silent grin when things went wrong but they still made it out. They hadn't lived to see justice. But maybe they'd finally been seen. That had to count for something. She met Corbin again 3 days later in a quiet diner off Route 50. He looked older, not in years, but in weight. "You look tired," he said. "So do you." They sat across from each other in the corner booth. Steam rose from untouched coffee cups. "They're tearing into Cormac," Corbin said after a long pause. 2 decades of operations, every clearance, every authorization. He won't survive it. Good. Corbin gave a small nod. You should know there's talk of stripping your clearance, possibly discharge. I assumed. He studied her. You don't seem angry. I'm not. Then what are you? She looked at the rain sliding down the window, relieved. He frowned, relieved. She smiled faintly. For the first time in years, I don't owe silence to anyone. Corbin's expression softened. You did the right thing, Nivea, but right things rarely come clean. Nothing ever does. They sat in quiet for a while. The waitress refilled their coffee, smiled politely, and moved on. Corbin leaned forward. You have options, you know. CIA wants to debrief you. Private security firms would pay more than you'd ever make in uniform. I've had enough of wars that don't end, she said. So what will you do? Nivea's gaze drifted past him to the small television above the counter. A news anchor spoke about Cormac's suspension. Then a photo flashed her own, uniformed, unsmiling. Underneath, the caption read, Reaper 1, the ghost who spoke. She turned back to Corbin. I'm done speaking. He nodded slowly. Then maybe for once you'll get some peace. She wasn't sure she believed that, but it was a kind thought. Weeks passed. The investigation stretched into months. Cormac resigned in disgrace before charges were even filed. Corbin was quietly promoted to his position, interim oversight, pending confirmation. The team Diaz, Vale, Anders were reassigned to different branches, their records scrubbed of silent vector. They wrote occasionally, short, coded messages, enough to say we're alive, we remember. Nivea moved out of Arlington and settled in coastal Maine. Small town, cold wind, endless sea. Her neighbors knew her as Ms. Winters. No one asked about her past. No one cared that she walked like she still measured distances between exits. She bought an old fishing boat, painted it white, named it Wraith. Every morning she took it out into the fog alone. The ocean was vast and silent, not the silence of secrets, but the kind that lets you breathe. Sometimes, when the water was perfectly still, she imagined she could hear them again, her team. Their laughter carried on the wind. The voices she used to command, now speaking only through memory. And in those moments she didn't feel haunted. She felt accompanied. One evening, months later, a black SUV appeared at the pier. Corbin stepped out, his coat flapping in the wind. Admiral, she greeted without surprise. Commander, he said, though technically she wasn't one anymore. You drove 6 hours to check on me, she asked. He smiled, to return something. He held out a small metal case. Inside, the scythe insignia, the same one from her flight jacket years ago, polished, clean. They're restoring your record, he said. Unofficially, you were never charged. Officially, you're on indefinite leave with commendation. She looked down at the insignia. Why now? He shrugged, because some debts take time to acknowledge. She closed the case gently. I don't need it. I know, he said. That's why you've earned it. The wind picked up, whipping strands of hair across her face. Corbin looked out over the water. You ever think about coming back? Every day, she said softly, and every day I decide not to. He nodded. You're still Reaper 1, you know, even without the call sign. She smiled faintly. Reaper 1 was a mission. Nivea Winters is a person. I'm learning the difference. He chuckled. That might be the bravest thing you've done yet. They stood in silence for a moment, two soldiers who'd seen too much, said too little, and still carried what they couldn't name. Then Corbin turned to leave. For what it's worth, he said over his shoulder, the world needs people like you. She watched him walk away. Maybe, she said softly, but it breaks them every time. That night she sat on the pier, the metal case beside her. The stars shimmered faintly through the fog. She thought about all the wars she'd fought, the loud ones, the secret ones, the ones inside her own head. None of them had really been won, but maybe that was the point. Maybe survival wasn't about victory. Maybe it was about endurance, staying human in places that tried to strip it away. The ocean lapped gently at the wooden beams. She took the insignia from the case and set it down beside her. Then, after a moment, she slid it into the water. It sank slowly, catching the moonlight before disappearing beneath the surface. A quiet goodbye. In the weeks that followed, she rarely checked the news. But one morning, a letter arrived, plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single line handwritten in neat script. They found peace, maybe now so can you. No name, just initials at the bottom. I see. For a second her breath caught, then she smiled, not bitterly, just tired. Cormac, or someone who wanted her to believe it. Either way, it didn't matter. The past was already buried. She folded the note, tucked it into her coat pocket, and stepped outside. The air was crisp. The sun rose slow over the Atlantic, painting the water gold. Gulls circled in lazy arcs overhead. She climbed onto the Wraith, started the engine, and steered toward the horizon. Each wave that hit the hull felt like punctuation, the steady rhythm of a story finally closing. Behind her, the coastline faded to mist. Ahead, only open sea. Her reflection in the glass was softer now, lines eased, eyes clearer. She wasn't the Reaper anymore, not the ghost of Kandahar, not the weapon they'd tried to bury and resurrect. Just Nivea Winters, a soldier who learned that silence could wound, but also heal. That truth could destroy, but also free. And that sometimes the bravest act wasn't speaking. It was choosing when to stay quiet. She throttled forward, the wind catching her hair, the ocean stretching wide and endless before her. The voiceover could have ended there, with the hum of the engine and the whisper of water against steel. But if it did, it would end like this. They called her Reaper One, the ghost who walked out of fire, carrying the weight of truth in her hands. She never asked for redemption, she just earned it. And somewhere beyond the silence, the world finally listened. The camera would fade on the horizon, light breaking over water, the boat shrinking to a silhouette against dawn. The story ending not with victory, but with grace. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.